Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
I humbly and gratefully accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
And so, my friends, it is with humility, determination, and boundless confidence in America's promise that I accept your nomination for President of the United States.
The conventions are over, and we now have two nominees, one for each party, for President of the United States. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. So here's the question. Have you been glued to your TV and radio over the past 2 weeks watching democracy in action at the Republican and Democratic conventions? I know I was. Were you inspired, disgusted, disinterested, riveted? For analysis of the convention and what's to come, we welcome Hampton University constitutional law, political science, and history professor, and our friend Eric Claville. Hi, Eric. How you doing?
Hi, Barbara.
Good.
Great to be here.
So glad that you're here to help us out with this. And joining us by phone is associate professor of law at and we are waiting for our other guest, who will be Amos Jones from Campbell Law School in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he will be joining us shortly. So, let's get started.
Let's do.
Wow, what a convention! What 2 weeks, right? I mean, a lot of drama in the beginning of both conferences, and at the end we got some unity or not? What do you think?
Well, Barbara, you're exactly right. I mean, tons of exciting things happened these last 2 weeks. We really saw the Democratic National Convention, which just ended last night, end on a high note with Hillary Clinton taking the stage and really making history. Exactly, the first female nominated for a major party to have the chance to be voted as Commander-in-Chief and President of the United States of America. And this comes on the heels of the first African-American president nominated in 2008 and winning again re-election in 2012. So there's been a lot of firsts for the Democratic Party and for America by way of the Democratic Party. I guess I should say that. So it's really a historical period. Mm-hmm. And then in contrast, you have the RNC convention, which I call the Trump convention, because if you really look at that particular convention, many top Republicans did not show. They had things to do back in their quote-unquote districts. Even Governor Kasich.
And they were considered, it's that they kept saying, well, the establishment didn't show up.
Right.
But the real people did show up at the RNC.
Well, I don't know who they were because there were you only had the major supporters of Donald Trump that were there. Of course, Ben Carson, he gave a speech. Doug Christie gave his speech. Chris Christie gave his speech. And then you had a few other Republicans that ran for president, Scott Walker, governor of Wisconsin, and I think Marco Rubio also spoke.
And Ted Cruz, of course.
Yeah, we're going to get to Ted Cruz. He spoke, and wow, did he speak ever. Let me tell you, you see that relationship between Trump and Cruz.
Well, and I want to talk about that, but let's bring in Amos Jones, who is professor of law at Campbell Law School in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hi, Amos. How are you?
Good afternoon. Good to hear your voice again.
Absolutely. You too. And your brother Eric is here too. And
yes.
We're here to talk. We're talking about, the conventions. And Eric was just mentioning that the RNC and what happened with Ted Cruz and Mr. Trump. I'd like to get your take on that.
Yes, I heard Eric, and what we saw from Ted Cruz was a surprise, I think, for the convention audience, though nominee Trump indicated that Ted Cruz had not pledged to endorse him anyway. But I believe what we saw was a setup for Ted Cruz's eventual run in the future at some point, perhaps again for the Senate, maybe even for president in 2020, either as a challenger to Donald Trump or as an I told you so Republican primary contender.
But, Amos, do you think that Donald Trump thought that maybe this would backfire and that he would, in fact, it would be the end of his career as opposed to an opportunity for him to come back?
I think that thought did cross the mind of Donald Trump. I don't know that Donald Trump invited him for this purpose, but I think a person like Donald Trump, who's been very strategic over the years, runs decision trees, and I believe probably thought of all the possible ways in which Ted Cruz might speak and what he might say, and the possible outcomes of all of them. And there was almost no way that Ted Cruz's speaking at that convention could harm Donald Trump. And I think that Donald Trump probably ran a similar analysis before extending invitations to others, some of whom not only did not speak at the convention, but did not come to the convention, like Governor Kasich of Ohio.
Mm-hmm. It was a stark contrast to me watching the Republican convention, the audience, and the Democratic convention, the audience. Talk about that, Eric.
Yeah, actually, you're exactly right, Barbara. This week with the DNC, I saw, of course, the diversity of the audience, diversity of the speakers that were there. I think one report showed that we had 18 African-American speakers, which is the same amount of African-Americans at the RNC convention.
Period.
You know, right, exactly.
And Bill Thomas happened to be one of them. We'll talk with him next week, week after next at the round table. But
and it's kind of interesting as you mature in life, which is a word for getting older. I would scan the audience. I'll see people I went to school with, and we're texting back and forth, say, get off camera and stuff like that. Just having fun. But also, if you look at the RNC convention, again, which I call the Trump convention because the Republicans just were not there, what I mean the establishment, you see, it's that older white American that's there. And it's they fought very hard to get other demographics there, and they just weren't really buying in. And with the DNC, you saw the inclusion of not just people of color. You saw also gender, more women speaking at that conference than anything else, prominent positions, people of different sexual orientations, and also different beliefs. The evangelicals, along with those who are not just pro-life, but also those that are pro-choice. Mm-hmm. But it showed that the DNC is more inclusive in saying, hey, we realize, and also religions, and we're going to talk about the Muslim family that spoke on behalf of their son that died. So you see what the Democratic Party said, listen, we have different views here, but we're willing to work together in order to make a more perfect union.
Amos, but when Eric just made the statement of the Republican Party tried to be more inclusive, but you can't wait until the week of a convention. I guess my point is, what was the Republican convention doing to entice and include minorities prior to? Because there really was no reason for them to come, was there?
Well, the Republican Party has been conducting outreach for probably 30 years, trying to diversify its ranks. It's interesting because the Republican Party, when you get down to it, is really reflective of the way the country operates in actuality. It was very uplifting to see such a patchwork of peoples and even viewpoints at the Democratic Convention and regions and everything. It was really an extravaganza of peoples. But the truth is, the way the United States actually works is, when you get into where the halls of power, including in the academy, in business, in law, in the courts, it looks just like the floor of the Republican National Convention. And what's interesting is that at the upper echelon of the Republican Convention, you've always had far more diversity among their elites than you do in the hall. And that includes the two Hispanic contenders who did very well, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, in their primary, who are Hispanic Republicans, as well as a number of speakers that they had along the way. And they even had a Peter Thiel, one of the co-founders of PayPal, who has a diverse sexual orientation, to deliver a speech in favor of Donald Trump. So their platform party, if you will, had more representation than their rank and file. And so there was a time when I was completely bothered by the lack of racial diversity in the Republican Party. But the more senior I become as a professor, as a lawyer, as someone who goes before courts and who challenges discrimination in the courts, frankly, it doesn't make a dime's worth of difference that you have all of that ethnic diversity, because at the end of the day, the country is completely segregated where blacks are concerned, and blacks have very little wealth and almost no power.
Wow. Eric, you want to respond?
Yeah, and Amos drives home a lot of very important points when you become a player or maybe a consultant, like Amos stated he is in the court, and myself in politics. You do see where it's kind of hard behind closed doors to really push the agenda. And I actually made this point in a summer program I taught for civil rights activism, comparing and contrasting the 1950s and 60s with the current Black Lives Matter. And I said, as a youth, you actually have the power. Those individuals in the 60s, those are the ones that helped to push change. John Lewis, he was a college student. All these individuals, and you talk about SNCC and all those players during that time period. Black Lives Matter was really, that's the youth movement of today's civil rights as it relates to community policing and so forth. Those are the individuals that actually pushed presidential campaigns to change their format. Not the African Americans that are in power, quote unquote, representing their countries, but those individuals pushed the platform, and now you saw the embracing of that, even on both stages. So there is some battle with that behind closed doors, but it is getting much better, much faster on the DNC side than the RNC. You still look. Michael Steele is still the black guy, and how long has that been? And how well has that worked with the RNC?
So Amos, are you saying that also in terms of Democratic leadership, because we have an African American president still until November, that the power structure, even on the DNC side, is still predominantly white?
Well, no. What I'm saying is that, well, yes, that's part of it, but more so in the levers of society itself. Okay. When you read the DNC WikiLeaks email messages, it's all about money, just like in the Republican Party, and that money, that's a function of the Citizens United decision, where there are super PACs and people can channel all kinds of huge donations to Democrats and Republicans, or both, at the same time, and it relates to the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about in the new prison-industrial complex. When you go back behind who's pulling the strings, it does not look like the Democratic Party floor. And when you read those email messages from WikiLeaks, you will see that black people are essentially good, reliable voters, with a handful of sprinkling of people up doing some of the bidding. Let's not forget that half of the Congressional Black Caucus is the call for the crack cocaine sentencing disparities in the first place. And in the District of Columbia now, it's a big Democratic position to be for the legalization of marijuana. We're going to look up in 20 years and find that more black people are in jail over that with records, because people think that you can smoke marijuana in public and at the wheel of a car, and it's not working out, and we're going to act surprised in 20 years like we always do and figure it out when it's too late and everybody's in lockup. Now, I say these things as a Democrat. I've never voted for a Republican before, but I'm a black person from the South who has a lot of realistic views that might seem to be conservative to people. So I have to look at this as I see it and look at what's really going on. The Democratic Party may have Jim Clyburn up there up high somewhere, and they may have had Ron Brown, and it's nice that we had Loretta Lynch and that we had Eric Holder, and Eric Holder gave a speech at the convention, that we have Barack and Michelle. But at the end of the day, the wealth disparities between blacks and whites are greater now than they were in the 60s. So we're being left behind at a time of economic expansion. Maybe it would have been worse if we had not had two black attorneys general. Maybe it would be worse. But again, as a person who goes into the courts of this country and takes on these issues on behalf of discriminated against blacks, women, people from other countries, and people with disabilities and people over the age of 40, there's not a whole lot of difference given the fact that money has corrupted everything, and the big shots are the people who fund these people and these judges who want to move up the bench. And that's something that's happening behind the scenes that people who've never fought for real don't even understand, because they don't know it's happening. And those of us who fight the fight are afraid to talk about it because we're afraid of recriminations, particularly from these judges. So it's really a problem. But again, I lay my partisan identification out there so that people won't tune me out and think that I'm here trying to promote the Republican Party. I'm not. I just think that black people who are going to be voting need to identify what our problems are and find a candidate or candidates who speak to those and have a real program.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. It's the Claville Report on politics, and we are analyzing the DNC and RNC conventions. We'd love to hear your take on what's going on and where we move from here. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Eric, does the Democratic Party take the black vote for granted?
Yes, and I say that very I say that unequivocally with belief that I do know that the DNC does take the black vote for granted, because you look at the policies that were put forth. Amos was just talking about that. One thing that the African American vote has always been, it's been faithful to the DNC. However, a lot of policies that have been put forth have not really favored African Americans. And Amos brings up, again, a lot of great points as it relates to the economic gap, also when it looks to, the school to prison pipeline and all of these things. So it really takes the voter, and this is what we educate voters on that I do. We have this huge democracy. We have this political machine that's run by big money, okay? However, an elected official is only elected with one man, one vote. You have the power, okay? And if you decide that person is not implementing policies on that's for the benefit of you, then you have the power to vote that person out. I use the great example we have here in Richmond, Eric Cantor. Eric Cantor lost to a couple of professors, at Randolph-Macon. And, he had all the money, all the influence, and really should have been the next Speaker of the House. However, because he forgot about his people that he's representing, they forgot about him. So no longer is he an elected official, but he's an unelected official. However, again, if you look at the DNC and their platform, if you look at the movements within the DNC, also a lot of appointments in the DNC now, not just the people you see in the spotlight, but behind closed doors, the chief human resource officer who's a Hampton alum. You look at other individuals who are appointed in various states. Those individuals are people of color, and those individuals are they've come up in the Democratic Party, and they're helping to push change, but it's really on the voter,
Amos, so there's going to be a whole bunch now, because it's already started. I mean, it's been going on all along. But this whole name calling and the vitriol and the back and forth, what and how should voters weed through all of that and really get down to the issues so that they can make an intelligent choice in November?
Voters must focus on their priorities from their moral position, and from their material position, and from the position of what they think is best for both the country and their own communities and families. If they do that, they will come to some core priorities. For example, if you think that the country needs to change in the way of having a more independent political leadership in the executive branch, if that's your priority, you're voting for Bernie Sanders in the primary, who's no longer in it, or Donald Trump, if that's the priority. If you think that the major parties are all sold out, and if they're sold out and black people don't have any money, that means the black faces in office are largely doing the bidding of people other than the poor blacks they represent, and poor blacks is essentially redundant if you read the Democratic email and if you understand the reality of the economics of this. So if that's your priority, you're going to vote in a different way from somebody whose priority is who says the best things about police killings or who has the right policy on police killings. That may take you in another direction. So people need to clearly define what is needed at this particular point. I will say this about black voters. Even if the Democratic Party takes black voters for granted, that is not entirely the fault of the Democratic Party. As even Donald Trump has written, your leverage in a deal is your ability to say, I don't need this, and to get up and walk out and to withhold your assent to the deal. If black people were to demand more, and when black people have demanded more, blacks have gotten more, and blacks have switched. After the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that's what really began the large alignment of blacks in the Democratic Party that had begun back with the New Deal.
Right, because they were Republicans prior.
Right,
they were Republicans prior too.
Exactly, and that was very thoughtful of black people to step back and say, wait a minute, it may be time to switch over. We've got this Southern Democrat, former Senator Lyndon Johnson, passing all this stuff, and he's doing it at great expense to him. Maybe we need to move over. And I'll say a lot of blacks remain Republican even through the 70s. And here's the last point on this question of how do you deal with the negativity. You look over it, and you look at what people have done and what they're promising to do and the likelihood that they can deliver and how they're going to deliver. Richard Nixon did something very interesting that kept a lot of blacks, especially business persons, very loyal to Richard Nixon despite his corruption. And that was his insistence, and it's in a scene, depicted in a scene from The Butler, where the urban rebellions are happening and Nixon's been elected on Law and Order, and he says, why don't we make black power, instead of about black power being fists and stuff, let's make it about black business empowerment and black enterprise. And so he started the minority enterprise small business investment corporations that gave black businesses 5 times the Small Business Administration loans, backed by large established companies who were given incentives, and that created a huge number of black businesses and millionaires. In Atlanta, 21 black millionaires were created by the airport project in the 70s alone, and that was a Maynard Richard Nixon motif. And if we think that way, then we'll know whom to vote for at any particular time. And we got to demand those types of policies, which is what Hillary told Black Lives Matter when they cornered her. And she said, they didn't corner her. She was kind enough to give an interview in cameras were rolling. She said, you can't make people love you, but you can tell us what to do and what your program and policies are, and bring those and push for those, and often succeed in getting those implemented. That's what people need to look at, other than beyond the rhetoric and the name calling, which you're always going to have.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Professors Eric Claville of Hampton University and Amos Jones of Campbell Law School about the Democratic and Republican conventions. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What did you think about the 2 conventions and where we're moving forward? Kima joins us from Hampton. Hi, Kima. You're on the air.
Honored professors, I'd like to say the fundamental issue is our voting system. As you professors know, we have first past the post voting system. If we had an alternative, like say a range or instant runoff system, we wouldn't have these fundamental issues. Okay,
we'll take your comment, and Eric, you want to respond?
Yeah,
thanks for calling.
I think the voter is speaking of a parliamentary type of voting, where you get a certain amount of votes for your particular party being represented, as opposed to having a 2-party system. Like I said, I think that's what the voter's talking about, and that's been a discussion that's been had in politics and really the political system across the board. So for countries that have parliament, you get a certain amount of every party that receives votes get a certain amount of representatives in parliament, and then of course your prime minister is then voted upon. So
there was a big difference in the way that the Republican candidate viewed America versus the Democratic candidate. I'm going to play some tape. Let's play the Donald Trump clip first.
Our convention occurs at a moment of crisis for our nation. Homicides last year increased by 17%. The number of police officers killed in the line of duty has risen by almost 50%. Nearly 180,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records ordered deported from our country are tonight roaming free to threaten peaceful citizens. Nearly 4 in 10 African American children are living in poverty. 2 million more Latinos are in poverty today than when President Obama took his oath of office less than 8 years ago. Our trade deficit is $800 billion. ISIS has spread across the region and the entire world. The situation is worse than it has ever been before.
So, Eric, when you listen to that, it makes you scared to get out of the bed in the morning.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I'm in a war zone. I need to go get as many guns as possible. But what Donald Trump is doing, he's playing on the fear, and which is why he's so competitive in the polls. Okay, and this is something we'll talk about in just a moment. He's playing on the fears of individuals in this country, taking events that have happened and kind of generalizing them and then exploding them about what ifs. This is simply a copy and paste of the 1981 Lee Atwater Southern Strategy. Okay, Lee Atwater was the person that would give a lot of what ifs. Maybe they did come in and steal this. I don't know. We just need to go take a look. He'll give that what if, and then he'll step back. Now, that strategy removed him from for being liable for slander, okay, because he didn't say that the person actually did have it and didn't have knowledge of it. But what it created doubt and it created fear. That speech that Donald Trump gave is the same type of speech that Goldwater and the others gave during the 1950s and 60s during the election period when they saw African Americans pushing for more civil rights and more equality throughout society. So, again, from one of the principles I teach from, there's nothing new under the sun. What was is, what is shall be. This has happened before. And again, it's fear-mongering, and it's making individuals feel very afraid and having trepidation about the change that the country is going toward.
So, Amos, when Donald Trump talks about being the law and order candidate, is that code for African Americans and Latinos?
It might be. I think but if it is, and if he's scaring people, people are already scared. If people weren't scared, then Black Lives Matter wouldn't be having die-ins. Aren't they afraid? Clearly they're afraid. People are afraid of being abused by police. So if a candidate like Hillary calls for implicit bias training of police officers, which she did last week, or the week before rather, then is that playing to fears? Well, yes, and it's completely valid. I think that Donald Trump is speaking to that litany he gave articulated a set of deliverables. That he's setting up some deliverables to bring about the 2 million additional Latinos in poverty over the last 8 years, about the blacks in poverty and black men in their prime, which is interesting because when Trump talks about the black male unemployment, he often will talk about black men in their prime, which is a very important distinction when you're looking at lifetime productivity. So, yeah, it's scary. Nothing new is under the sun, but FDR scared America so badly in 1937 and 38. When he was saying we might have to get into World War II, the New York Times called him a warmonger and a fearmonger, and they were completely wrong because his concerns were totally founded. And so what we have after last night are two different, I don't think they're even visions for America. I think they're two different descriptions of what's going on. I believe that ordinary American people, including people who are subject to police violence, people who are subject to even deportation, or people subject to crime, or people subject to having to go to one of these ill-conceived wars that we're in, that we've not gotten out of. All of this is the people in America, I don't think, feel the sense of optimism that the wealthy Democratic elites up on that podium this week felt. And I'm saying this as an objective scholar, not as someone who's trying to endorse the Republican approach. I think we have to be fair. And the people I talk to, everybody's scared.
Well, and let's play the Hillary Clinton clip that we can hear the difference in tone.
Tonight, we've reached a milestone in our nation's march toward a more perfect union. The first time that a major party has nominated a woman for president. After all, when there are no ceilings, the sky's the limit. Our country's motto is E pluribus unum. Out of many, we are one. Will we stay true to that motto? Well, we heard Donald Trump's answer last week at his convention. He wants to divide us from the rest of the world and from each other. He wants us to fear the future and fear each other. Well, you know, a great Democratic president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, came up with the perfect rebuke to Trump more than 80 years ago during a much more perilous time. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
So that plays a little bit to what you were just talking about, Amos.
Right. That's her cherry picking after he had been bashed by everybody for foreseeing the threat of Germany in Western Europe. After he got us into the war, he had to tell everybody, oh, don't fear anything. And then, of course, the greatest generation went off and fought and died. So what we have is beautiful, soaring rhetoric. I mean, this could have been Millard Fillmore talking centuries or more ago, because it was all so vague. I mean, I was very inspired watching every night of the Democratic Convention, and I was also intrigued watching every night of the Republican Convention. But what was so amazing about the Democratic Convention is I almost forgot by day 3 that we have all these problems. I forgot that there were police officers being shot in our cities and that there were black men being gunned down all the time. I forgot that there are 25 active race discrimination employment complaints that I have against the Department of Defense schools on behalf of minorities of all kinds, because the Department of Justice wants to beat back these complainants. And I forgot that we have 2 black attorneys general who are animating these problems because it all looks so good. But when you pull back the curtain and really look at how we doing, y'all, it's not so good. And somebody like Bernie Sanders dealt with it, and Trump deals with it in a different way. But I'm telling you, there's a huge chunk of voters now that 29% of black people are now identified as as independent or unaffiliated. 29%. That's after Barack Obama got 93% of the black vote in 2012. Well, hey, by 2012, the Gallup poll had black people as 29% independent, other, or don't know, and 5% Republicans. I think that, the black vote and black people are looking a little bit more realistically on things, and they're looking at both conventions with some skepticism but some agreement.
Okay, our phones are lit up, so let's take some calls. Jared joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Jared. You're on the air.
Hey, guys.
Hi.
So I think your caller brings up some very good points. And I, too, watched both the Democratic National Convention. And even though I can't get those many hours back to my life, I watched the Republican National Convention as well. Sorry. But what I was trying to pull from is when we're looking for these leaders, you can kind of look at their base to see what they really stand for. And I think Donald Trump did so well in the Republican side of things because he removed that tricky coded language that we all had to navigate for so long. Sometimes when things were said, they were blanketed statements by like a Rubio, and their policies would disproportionately affect certain communities. But when Trump came out and said it and his base rallied behind it, it was a really scary thing to watch. So what I'm seeing now is, and I guess my question, I would open it up for you guys, would be in all of this, with the emerging, rising Latino population, do you think that the African-American population, after what might have been viewed as a discouraging lack of progress with the congressional blocks of Obama and things like that over the last 8 years and the poor voter turnout in 2010, all the things that built up towards what could be viewed as ineffective and not enough progress, do you think that people are just going to tune out altogether and leave it alone? They feel discouraged. Okay,
Jared, thanks so much for the call. Eric?
Look, Amos and the caller brings up a very important point that's really I believe that's going to decide this election. Voters are waking up. I mean, they're listening to candidates. They're looking at platforms, and they're saying, hey, if I vote for this person, are they really going to represent me? Listen, I've got to work 2 jobs, and I still don't have health insurance in order to support my family. The economy is not getting better. And I believe that there's going to be a lack of voters, what we call voter apathy, because out of frustration with both systems, also because of their current economic status. And I believe that the main push in order for either side to win this election is going to be, hey, getting their voter base out to actually vote. That's really the push. Independents are going to vote. And because independents tend to be more engaged in researching and understanding issues and making a more conscious decision because they're middle of the road. But your base voters are the ones that you're going to have to get out. And it boils down on the Democratic side to those individuals who are feel that society has left them behind, more so people of color. Also, the young college students that are siding with Bernie Sanders. On the Republican side, it's those individuals that really can't stomach voting for Donald Trump, those conservative, religious voters, Christians and others, or quote-unquote real Republicans that say, hey, I don't know if I can really vote for this guy because of the way that he does talk. One thing that I stated this earlier, one thing that Trump does is that he appeals to the common person, and he's tapped into the trepidation and fears of people across the board. But really what it's going to boil down to is, do you trust Trump or do you trust Hillary Clinton and the system?
And so that trust issue is across the board.
It is.
Rob joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Rob. You're on the air.
Hey, how are you?
Okay.
I have a question regarding the WikiLeaks and if they're going to be a problem, because from what I read, and I could be wrong, but it seems like the DNC did a lot of shady work and on Bernie, and it's going to be hard once that information gets out and more people know about it for people like myself who was supporting Bernie to get behind Hillary.
Okay.
Because it feels like she did steal it. And I was wondering if there was any connection. They wanted to blame the Russians, but, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't Obama and Hillary has something go down that came out in the first batch of WikiLeaks regarding something about uranium or something and money being transferred through Canada into, I believe, the Clinton Foundation?
All right, let's see what we can find out. And Amos, I'm going to turn to you to answer this question.
Yes, there's all kinds of stuff in those WikiLeaks, and there's so much and more coming out that you could put 5 reporters full-time on that and findings. There is a search box on one of the websites where you can look for people's names, and it was interesting that Governor Pat McCrory of North Carolina's name came up 100 times, and what was learned is that the transgender bathroom issue in North Carolina and the state legislature's actions on that Charlotte City ordinance were used to generate all kinds of big money from people interested in transgender bathrooms in the Democratic Party, and it really mobilized people. And it's just, it's seedy, but this is what happens with money in politics. The money as to economic advantage for individuals or the Clinton Foundation, there are some indications that there may have been some email about that, and there's more to be seen. So we just have to watch and go and call those documents for ourselves and see what's in them. But the issue does go back to what Professor Claville said, which is trust. And the question is, whom do you trust? But trust as to what? If you want to trust someone to really put racism and policing on the agenda, again, let's just be honest. If that's your issue and that's what you're looking for trust for, you're voting for Hillary Clinton. If you think that what you need is some economic empowerment and some Richard Nixon-style affirmative action for black businesses, because in the black community, trickle-down economics may not have been shown to work for everybody, but black people do trickle-down economics. Because when a black person has a business, they tend to invest that money in the community and hire each other. They help their family. And so you actually get a trickle-down. They put the money in the church. So you get a trickle-down effect in a black community. So a rising tide, if channeled to the black community, could lift all boats. So whom do you trust to have a black enterprise jobs program at this point? It might be Donald Trump. That's the trust question. One quick thing on Hispanics. That was a very important point that the caller before made about what the Hispanics are going to do. In the Nevada caucuses, Donald Trump got more Hispanic votes, and it was a small group of maybe 70 voters. But he got more Hispanic votes than Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz combined. And in an NBC-commissioned SurveyMonkey scientific poll in May, 29% of Hispanics indicated supporting Donald Trump. Now, Hispanics do not turn out like blacks and whites. In 2012, 48% of eligible Latino voters voted, compared to 67% of eligible white voters and 64% of eligible blacks. Also, it's hard to poll Hispanics because 60% of Hispanics do not have a landline phone, and landline phones are one of the principal means of polling. So the Hispanic vote, it's a major toss-up area, and it's different in South Florida from South Texas, perhaps. The poll came out and found that Mexican Americans on the border, who are American people who've been there a long, long time, they're the strongest people in favor of building a wall on the border. So there are some surprising things. Hispanic voters apparently are very sophisticated because they don't all just run out religiously and vote one way or the other. They put Arnold Schwarzenegger in California when he unseated Gray Davis after the recall. So, this Democratic theory that dark people go out running behind Democrats because they put some brown faces on prime time doesn't seem to carry a lot of weight when you read the actual data and election results.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric. Amos, I tell you, you just will put it down there on the line. I love it. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, look, I never met anybody that keeps it more real than me. So I love listening to Amos and how he dissects things. But he's exactly right. When you look into those emails and so forth, you'll see that the system it is run by money. Keep in mind, there's going to be $1 billion spent on each side of this election. Okay, that's
$1 billion.
Yes,
you said with a B.
Yes, $1 billion. Heck, the last 2008 was $1 billion. 2012 was about $1.5 billion. So you're looking at $2 billion. It just keeps going up and up, up. And let's not forget that terrible case that was decided in the U.S. Supreme Court that allows anyone to create a super PAC and pour in as much money as they want, even a foreign country. So one of the worst decisions, really, as it relates to politics, to influence our current elections. But that's the reason why I stated earlier that the voter has awakened. They're looking at these issues and saying, wait a minute, I'm getting left behind. I'm not getting ahead. And then sometimes I can't even catch up.
With the Bernie Sanders people even walking out of the convention.
And look, it's going to be very hard to get those voters back. I'm telling you. Right now, the election is neck and neck. And I said this months ago. I said, right now, the election, the polls don't show it, but on the ground, they're neck and neck because of the frustration of the American people with the system. And this isn't a shoe-in win for Hillary Clinton, I'm telling you. It's not. They're going to have to work hard. And for Donald Trump, he's just really sitting back and picking little issues apart and speaking plain language, even if it's uncouth, even if it's very rude, but he's speaking plain language to a lot of these issues, and people are catching on. But the question becomes, when you go into that voter booth, who do you trust to represent your issues?
Well, we have to listen to Eric Claville because you were one of the first ones a year ago to say that Trump would even be in this position where he is now. I just want to say we've got about 3 minutes left and wanted to let the audience know next week Lisa Godley and I will be in D.C. at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. And the Claville Report, the very first one that we did with Eric, has been nominated for a Salute to Excellence award. So congratulations,
Thank you,
Eric.
sir.
That is fantastic. And we are very excited.
Eric and Barbara. Congrats.
Yeah, so we're very, very excited about that. And so we will let you know if we actually win. So
Thank you.
So that is very cool. So very last minute, 1 minute each from you about what voters should be doing between now and November in terms of getting ready for the vote. Eric.
All right, 60 seconds. Educate yourself on the issues. First of all, register to vote if you're not registered to vote. Don't sit at home and not vote. Because that's just saying that you're just giving a vote to someone else and you're not voicing your concerns. Secondly, educate yourself and your friends. You guys get together, talk about these issues, and engage your local officials. But one thing that the parties need to do, Amos was exactly right, is basically a different discussion, perspective of the current state of America and the world. But there were no visions that were put out there by either party to fix these issues. We need visions from these parties.
Okay. That is Eric Claville with Hampton University. Thank you so much, as always. And Amos, you got the last minute.
My 60 seconds is devoted to the voters. Voters, empower yourselves, not just when you identify the issues, not just in what's being said, but look at what's not being said or what's being said at the expense of other issues. When the Congress spends an entire summer prioritizing the problem of illegal immigration, about people who are either not here yet or should not be here, and black lives are going down the tubes, as has happened, ask yourself who's going to put that priority back on the table for citizens who are here. Think about what you're not being shown. And finally, when in North Carolina, for example, when the Attorney General announces that she's going to sue the state over a statute that the state passed over, for example, transgender bathrooms. Ask yourself why she did not sue the state over its voting rights violations with voter ID laws. That is an actionable claim under the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 65, which black people are actually included in, that Loretta Lynch did not rush down to the state for on that, and why that's a priority instead of black voting and black ID. I went to vote in North Carolina, and the only people at the table where you were pulled aside for documents were me and another black person. And we joked about it because it was so predictable.
And
so,
you were out of your time. We got you, Amos. I know that you were running through, but we really appreciate you. That is Amos Jones, and he is a professor of law with Campbell Law School in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Claude McKnight of Group Take 6, and you're listening to Another View, Fridays at noon at WHRV 89.5 FM.
And welcome back, everyone. I was in the middle of a project when the email came across my computer that my friend and mentor, George Crawley, passed away this week. George Crawley believed in Norfolk and did all he could to make this city a great place to live, work, worship, and play. He was so many things to so many people. For me, he was one of the very first city leaders to greet me when I moved to Hampton Roads from Philadelphia in 1993. He encouraged me in my television management career and mentored me as I began my life in public service. Our Lisa Godley spoke with NRHA Commissioner Alfonso Albert, Executive Director John Konak, and School Board Chair Rodney Jordan about George and what he meant to the city and to them personally.
He was a man of all time.
Just one of the many ways those who knew George Crawley describe him. The Newport News native moved to Norfolk in 1963 and almost immediately began his work on an anti-poverty project in Ghent. His goal, to move 3,000 residents out of poverty. Alfonso Albert says he was his mentor.
George was knowledgeable, had a very keen mind when it came to not just public administration, but many things that impact people in general.
Between 1964 and 1973, George Crawley headed the Southeastern Tidewater Opportunity Project, or STOP, giving preschoolers a leg up on their education, creating educational opportunities for adults, and implementing job training programs. Under his leadership, STOP's $200,000 annual budget grew to more than $9 million. In 1973, he became the Assistant Director of Human Services, making him the highest-ranking African-American City of Norfolk employee. John Konak knew George Crawley for 34 years.
Incredible teacher, mentor, healer, innovator. As bureaucratic as it might sound, he was an administrator.
George Crawley was Norfolk's Assistant City Manager for 14 years. He was also the first African-American to hold that title.
He had an amazing capacity to take huge, complex projects and break them down so he could work with staff. As a bureaucrat myself, I really appreciated that he had the ability to just manage a large number of people and keep them focused on a common goal.
He orchestrated a community policing program also known as PACE. When George Crawley retired from city government in 1996, his retirement party brought a sea of city employees to Chrysler Hall to wish him well. Alfonso Albert remembers one conversation in particular that he had that day that he's never forgotten.
Vera Franklin said to me, she said, Al, you know, nobody is indispensable. But she said, Lord knows, George Crawley came as close as anybody could get. She said, a man could step on your toes and not even mess up your shine. And I think everybody understood that. She said, you could leave George and say, I think I just got chewed out, and not even be sure.
The lives he touched could be seen in the stacks of letters, emails, and cards he received upon his retirement.
People were telling him, Mr. Crawley, you don't know me, but you advocated for me to get this job at so-and-so, and now I'm the director of so-and-so, and letters and letters and letters like that after he retired from the city.
Retirement did not slow George Crawley down. In 1997, he started the second chapter in his life, the Crawley Group, a consulting firm. He was also in charge charge of community initiatives for the Norfolk Redevelopment and Housing Authority. These initiatives including restoring Norfolk's historic Attucks Theater. Norfolk School Board Chairman Rodney Jordan also describes Crowley as a mentor. He remembers taking a trip with Crowley to look at how other cities were restoring their theaters and revitalizing the communities around them.
When you look at the success that the Attucks is having, when you see the growth that's happening now on 35th Street, when you see these neighborhood commercial corridors starting to come up and these entrepreneurs, Sweet Teas, Croker Spot, and Granny's, and these other businesses coming up, I trace all that back to these efforts that Mr. Crowley was leading 18, 20 years ago. Nobody would know it, but those of us that just had the opportunity to be around him and watch him work, we see George Crowley all over the city and all over Hampton Roads.
George Crowley was a major founder and the first president of the Hampton Roads Committee of 200-plus men. In 2007, Crowley was presented with the Cosmopolitan Club of Norfolk's Distinguished Service Award, also known as the First Citizen Award. George Crowley passed away this week from complications of a heart attack. He was 82. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And funeral services for George Crowley will be held on Monday, August the 1st at 11 a.m. at St. John's AME Church, Butte Street in Norfolk. To his wife Cynthia and the Crowley family, the Another View crew extends its deepest condolences. Thank you, as always, for spending your time with us here at Another View. If you'd like to hear this show again or share it with a friend, visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. While you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter, a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We're on Facebook, so like us, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week, Lisa Godley and I will be attending the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Washington, D.C. Another View, as we said before, has been nominated for a Salute to Excellence Award from NABJ. So cross your fingers for us, please. We hope that will work out. And Eric, congratulations again.
Thank you again, Barbara.
we really are excited about that. And we'll have an encore edition of the Another View program for your listening pleasure next week. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer. And Dory Morrison, thank you, Dory, answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Make it a wonderful weekend, everyone. We're back live with you again in 2 weeks for Another View.